When it comes to Kusama's native token called KSM, I'm thinking about three different hypothetical price scenarios, and this is even an event where maybe there is a altcoin season during this cycle. But even though nothing I say is financial advice, the first scenario that I do want to talk about is maybe the idea of $180 when it comes to KSM. Now that's around an 11.5x from here, and the market cap at that point, it'd be around 3 billion if we were to, let's say, consider the current circulating supply. And by the way, all these calculations are based off of the current circulating supply. But even besides that point, why wouldn't maybe the idea of $180 necessarily surprise me? It's because I do like the fundamentals of Kusama, and let me explain what I mean by this. When it comes to Kusama, quite simply put, the way you take a look at it is that it is basically a canary network to Polkadot. Now, in order to understand, I think, the importance of a canary network in this case, I think it's first important to know what Polkadot is even in the first place, right? Because, or not, why would this even have really any significance? So again, I'm going to talk about Polkadot first and talk about why Kusama quite essentially is kind of helping that in a sense. Because if we take a look at Polkadot, it is basically, the way you take a look at it, focused on interoperability. It's focused on connecting blockchains together. Now, on the flip side, right, a lacking interoperability, I think, is actually somewhat of an issue. And let me explain why. Because there's many blockchains out there, many networks out there, but because a lot of them, they're independent of one another, in some cases, they don't have this ability to freely send data and value to each other. So then, as a result, if that is the case, then they do lack interoperability. Like, for instance, if I take a look at something like, Bitcoin and Ethereum, they're very massive, right? But then because they're independent of one another, they can't freely send data and value to each other. And again, in that case, hypothetically, they do lack interoperability. So what kind of steps in and saves the day, so to speak? Something like Polkadot. So then I think Polkadot, again, it plays a pretty important role for what it is. It's a pretty massive project. I get it. When it comes to its native token called DOT, it's had a pretty big pullback. But you know what? I just like the fundamentals of Polkadot nonetheless. And again, when I take a look at something like Kusama being the canary network to that, I think is pretty awesome. Because if we take a look at a canary network, basically in this case, right, projects that usually want to launch on Polkadot, in some cases, I do see them starting off with Kusama first. Now, the reason for that, I think, is because, hypothetically, it's far cheaper to rent building space on Kusama when compared to Polkadot. And also on top of that, it's allegedly easier to make changes on Kusama when compared to Polkadot. So if I were to put myself in the perspective of, like, let's say a developer, or let's say I'm just starting out, right? I think, like, if I want to, start off with Polkadot, kind of starting off with Kusama first is a way to kind of test out the project, and then later on maybe move on to Polkadot. It's just more so of kind of like an easier sort of, I think, start when compared to just going on to Polkadot, which again, hypothetically, it may be more expensive to rent building space. So then this is why, the way you take a look at it, Kusama's kind of like this sort of, I would say, system, so to speak, to kind of bring more projects maybe to Polkadot. That's just the analogy I would put on it. It's kind of like, let's say, I go to a gym and then I get a free trial at a gym, or let's say I go to a car dealership and I get a test drive. It's something like that. I know it's a little bit different, but then it's just kind of the vibe that it gives me. So then again, Kusama being a canary network to Polkadot, I think it is pretty interesting. Now, granted though, a project that, let's say starts off with Kusama, they're not necessarily, having to move on later on to Polkadot if they don't want to, right? That isn't the case in my perspective. Like, again, we take a look at, for instance, something like Moonriver, which I am excited about Moonriver, by the way, but even besides that, Moonriver is on Kusama. So then, again, this is why I like Kusama, it's just the role that it kind of plays. So in my point of view, if I believe in Polkadot, why wouldn't I believe in somewhat of its, I would kind of consider, support system in a sense, right? This is the analogy that I would put on it, which in this case is Kusama. So I kind of like that. It's kind of like the analogy that I sometimes use, Batman and Robin. There is a superhero and then there's a sidekick. I think Polkadot is kind of like the superhero, and then Kusama is kind of like the sidekick, right? So then this is just, again, the way I view this project. I do like Kusama. I get it when it comes to, its native token hasn't been necessarily doing the best. There has been moments in time where sometimes people ask me, oh man, is there a future when it comes to Kusama? But then to me, only time will tell. But if I believe in the future of Polkadot, again, I'm not telling you to do anything, but personally, I do believe also in the future of Kusama. But only time will tell, and again, maybe the idea of $180 wouldn't necessarily surprise me in an event where maybe there's even, let's say, a fully fledged type of altcoin season during the cycle, but only time will tell. Now, the second scenario that I do want to talk about is maybe the idea of $190. That's around a 12x from here. Market cap at that point would be around 3 billion, again, if we were to consider the current circulating supply. Now, the way to take a look at this market cap is that it doesn't seem like maybe something that ridiculous to me because, for instance, Shiba Inu at one point reached a market cap of around 40 billion, and that was like in 2021. Again, I'm not saying that Kusama is going to be the most popular thing out there for all time because I don't think it will. However, when I kind of consider the progression when it comes to Polkadot, also on top of that, how they're supposedly actually over 1 million holders when it comes to DOT, which is Polkadot's native token. Just when I kind of consider all this, just maybe the idea of $190 wouldn't necessarily surprise me. However, even besides that, the third hypothetical price scenario that I do want to explore is maybe the idea of $200. Around a 13x from here, and the market cap at that point, considering current circulating supply, would be nearly 3.5 billion. Now, why am I still excited for this cycle, right? It's because when I take a look at currently, there's over 600 million crypto owners, which I think is actually very impressive. But I think it's even more impressive considering how back in the peak of the 2021 bull run, there was around 300 million crypto owners. So, there's way more right now. However, I don't think I've seen a fully fledged type of altcoin season during this cycle. But if it did look better than, back in 2021, it wouldn't necessarily surprise me. And I take a look at, also the Bitcoin ETF, the Ethereum ETF. I just like the factors right now a lot more than back then. But, ultimately all I can do is just stay patient, hold, and that's pretty much about it. Because whenever altcoins ever decides to even wake up maybe during this cycle, and let's say have an altcoin season, that's beyond my control. Sometimes you like to say, oh, but why don't you pull up a price chart? Draw a triangle or draw a falling wedge pattern. Even if I did that, I still wouldn't know the perfect time, right? Because how is the market going to care about what I do on that price chart? Instead, I'd rather just stay patient, hold, and I just wait. And literally that's about it. Because whether or not altcoins, if they ever, right, want to hypothetically wake up and maybe have an altcoin season, be at the start of it, who knows? Hypothetically, maybe in October, or let's say it waits until even next year, sometime around March. Whenever that time frame is, or that timeline, I should say, it's beyond my control. So the only thing I can do is control myself, which is what I'm going to do, and that is just dollar cost averaging, holding, and just waiting. However, I am not telling anyone to do anything, by the way, but this is just what I'm doing for the projects that I'm a fan of. I'm just holding, waiting, and that's pretty much about it. And feel free to subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I'd greatly appreciate it. It's been Lee the Captain, and I'll catch y'all on the next one. I'm out. Peace. Bye.